Good evening. So I've got a question about solving this radical equation, and um, there are some really common mistakes that are made in this, so we want to kind of be careful. So if we have this equation, the square root of 28x plus 9 equals 3x minus 1. Whenever you're solving equations, you're always trying to undo things to get x by itself, right? Or whatever the variable is. And so we have to pay attention to what our inverse operations are. So for instance, plus and minus, they come in pairs. If you're adding something and you want to get rid of it in an equation, you have to subtract it and vice versa. And then you've got multiplication and division. Those undo each other. Well, with a square root and then something squared, they're inverse operations, they undo each other. So when I see this square root equaling stuff and I want to get rid of the square root, I have to square this side of it. But anything you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other, right? So we're going to square that side. Now, be really careful because here is the mistake that people like to make. So here's my scratch work off to the side. So we're thinking we got 3x minus 1 squared. Many people out there will go, oh, look, that's 9x squared plus 1 because they square this term and then they square this term, and that is wrong. Okay? My advice to you is to actually write out what you're doing. So 3x minus 1 squared. That means you're multiplying the 3x minus 1 times itself. So I would write it out, 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. Because at this point, we need to use our distributive property. All right, and we need to multiply that 3x through everything. So that gives me 9x squared minus 3x. Then we have to take the negative 1 and multiply it by all the terms in the second set of parentheses. So that's another minus 3x plus 1. Now if we combine our like terms, that gives me 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. So notice you've got this extra term in here when you do it the correct way, okay? So be really careful about that. So back to the equation over here. When I square the left-hand side, all that does is get rid of the square root. So we're going to have 28x plus 9 equals 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. Now, when I go to solve this, this tells me we have a quadratic equation, right? Okay, so when I see a highest exponent being 2, that's a quadratic equation, that tells me I want to set equal to 0 and solve that. So I'm going to subtract the 28x from both sides. Okay? And just because of my limited space here, I'm also going to wind up subtracting the 9 from both sides. So that's going to give me 0 equals 9x squared minus, 34x minus 8. And then I need to solve that equation. So what do we do to solve that? We could use the quadratic formula, or we could possibly do factoring. Okay. So let me erase my scratch work so I can do some more over here. If I am going to try factoring, what I'm going to look for is I'm going to use that AC method. And so 9 times negative 8 is negative 72. So I want to find two numbers that add up to be the negative 34, but yet multiply to be the negative 72. So I always make like a little table, and we have factors of 72 and then what the sum is of those. Now, easiest thing to do is start at 1 and work your way up. One of the numbers has to be negative. Okay, so I'm just going to make the first one negative. So negative 1 times 72, you add those up, you get 71. That's not what I'm looking for. And then we could do 2. So 72 divided by the 2, that would be 36. If I add those up, I get 34, but I need a negative 34. So that just tells me I need to switch my sign. So I'm going to take the middle term, rewrite that as plus 2x minus 36x. So note, just I took this and rewrote it. If you combine your like terms, you're going to get what you started with back there. Now I'm going to factor out of the first two terms the greatest common factor, which would just be an x. And if I do that, I'm left with a 9x plus 2. Now for the second two terms, I'm going to factor out a negative 4, because that's the greatest common divisor for those. And that's going to leave me with a 9x plus 2. Now please note, we have a 9x plus 2 in both sets of parentheses. So I can factor that out and I get an x minus 4. So now that I've got it factored, I set each factor equal to 0 and I solve those. So subtracting 2 will get 9x equals negative 2. So x is negative 2/9. And then on the other equation, we'll just add 4 to both sides, so we'll get x equals 4. All right, hope this helps, and have a wonderful day.